The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the dusty general store, and Samuel Kane watched as a young woman stepped down onto the wooden boardwalk of Eureka Springs, Arkansas, her dark eyes wide with uncertainty as she clutched a worn leather satchel to her chest. It was the summer of 1882, and Samuel had been expecting her arrival for 3 weeks now, ever since he had received the telegram from the matrimonial agency in San Francisco confirming that his bride had boarded the train heading east. He was 32 years old, tall and lean from years of working cattle on his modest ranch just outside of town, and he had never been more nervous in his entire life. The arrangement had seemed practical when he had first written to the agency 6 months ago. The winters were lonely, and his small homestead needed a woman's touch if it was ever going to feel like a real home. He had saved enough money to pay the agency's fee and to promise a comfortable life for whoever agreed to come west and marry him. But as he approached the young woman now, removing his hat and clutching it between calloused hands, he realized that he had not fully considered one crucial detail that the agency had mentioned in passing in their correspondence. His bride, Olivia Hernandez, was from a small village in northern Mexico, and she spoke only Spanish. "Madam," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Miss Hernandez." She looked up at him, her face partially shadowed by the bonnet she wore, and nodded slowly. "Sí," she said softly, and then she spoke a rapid stream of Spanish that left him completely bewildered. Samuel felt heat creep up his neck. He gestured toward himself. "Samuel Kane," he said, speaking slowly as if that would somehow help. Your husband, well, going to be." Olivia studied him carefully, her expression guarded. She was younger than he had expected, probably not more than 22 or 23, with olive skin and dark hair that was pulled back in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. Despite the dust from her long journey, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that Samuel found himself respecting immediately. "Casa," she said, making a gesture that Samuel interpreted as a question about where they were going. "Yes, home," he said, nodding vigorously. "My ranch." "It is not far." He reached for her satchel, and she hesitated for just a moment before allowing him to take it. It was surprisingly light, and Samuel realized that this young woman had traveled hundreds of miles to marry a stranger, bringing with her only whatever fit in this single small bag. The thought made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar emotion. The wagon ride out to his ranch took about 40 minutes, and they sat in uncomfortable silence the entire way. Samuel tried several times to make conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the town, but he quickly realized how futile it was. Olivia nodded politely at his words, but her eyes held the glazed look of someone who understood nothing being said to her. When they finally arrived at his property, Samuel helped Olivia down from the wagon and watched as she took in her new home. The ranch house was small but sturdy, built from local timber with a covered porch that wrapped around the front and one side. Beyond it stood a barn, a chicken coop, and a corral where his 4 horses grazed lazily in the afternoon sun. It was not much, but Samuel had built most of it with his own hands, and he felt a flash of pride as he watched Olivia's expression. She turned to him and said something in Spanish, her tone suggesting a question. Samuel wished desperately that he could understand her. "Come inside," he said, gesturing toward the house. "I will show you." The interior of the house was dim and cool after the bright sunshine outside. Samuel had done his best to clean before her arrival, but he could see now through Olivia's eyes how sparse and masculine the space was. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, and a few shelves lined with canned goods and supplies. A doorway led to a small bedroom, and another to a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove. Olivia set her satchel down carefully and walked slowly through the space, running her fingers along the table's surface, examining the dishes stacked beside the dry sink. She looked back at Samuel and spoke again in Spanish, her words flowing together in a melodic rhythm that he found strangely beautiful despite his complete lack of comprehension. "I am sorry," Samuel said, and the inadequacy of those words struck him immediately. "I do not understand. I wish I did." Something in his tone must have conveyed his meaning because Olivia's expression softened slightly. She nodded and then gestured to herself and then to the kitchen, as if asking if she should prepare a meal. "You must be tired," Samuel said, shaking his head. "Rest first. We can eat later." But Olivia was already moving toward the kitchen, examining the supplies he had laid in. Samuel watched as she found flour, dried beans, some salt pork, and a few vegetables he had brought from town. She looked back at him and smiled for the first time since her arrival, a small, tentative expression that transformed her entire face. That evening, they ate a meal of beans and cornbread that Olivia had prepared, seasoned with spices she must have brought in her satchel because Samuel certainly did not own anything that could make food taste like this. They sat across from each other at the table, and Samuel found himself acutely aware of every sound, every movement. He wanted to ask her about her journey, about her family, about what had made her agree to travel so far to marry a man she had never met. But all he could do was eat in silence and occasionally say good and thank you, which felt woefully insufficient. After dinner, Samuel showed Olivia to the bedroom. "You sleep here," he said, pantomiming putting his head on his hands. "I will sleep out there." He pointed back toward the main room where he had already set up a bedroll near the fireplace. Olivia frowned and spoke rapidly in Spanish, gesturing between the bedroom and Samuel. He gathered that she was protesting the arrangement, probably saying that he should keep his own bed. But Samuel shook his head firmly. "You take the room," he said. "Until we are properly married, it is only right." They stood there for a long moment, and Samuel wondered if every day of his married life was going to be this frustrating, this full of misunderstanding and awkward gestures. But then Olivia reached out and placed her hand briefly on his arm, her touch light and warm even through his shirt sleeve. She said something soft in Spanish, and though Samuel did not understand the words, he thought he understood the sentiment. Gratitude, perhaps, or simply acknowledgement of his attempt at propriety. That night, lying on his bedroll in the main room, Samuel stared up at the dark ceiling and thought about the enormous chasm that existed between himself and the woman sleeping in the next room. He had agreed to this arrangement, thinking it would be simple and practical, a business transaction that would benefit them both. But now he realized that he had invited another human being into his life, someone with her own thoughts and feelings and fears, and he had no way to communicate with her beyond the most basic gestures. The next morning, Samuel woke before dawn as he always did and went out to tend to the horses and chickens. When he came back inside, Olivia was already up and had prepared breakfast. She had somehow transformed his meager supplies into a meal that smelled incredible, and Samuel found himself smiling as he sat down at the table. "Thank you," he said, and Olivia nodded. "De nada," she replied, and then she said something else that he could not understand. After breakfast, Samuel stood to leave for his day's work, but then he paused. He had planned to ride out and check on his small herd of cattle, a task that would take most of the day. But the thought of leaving Olivia alone in this strange place, unable to communicate with anyone if she needed help, made him uneasy. He pointed to himself, and then toward the door, trying to convey that he had work to do. Olivia nodded and made a shooing motion with her hands, as if to say that she understood and that he should go. But Samuel could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the way her hands twisted together in front of her. On impulse, he walked to the shelf where he kept a few books and pulled down an old primer that had belonged to his mother. It was a basic reader, filled with simple words and pictures. He brought it to Olivia and opened it to the first page, pointing at the word cat and then at the drawing beside it. "Cat," he said clearly. Olivia looked down at the book and then up at his face. Something sparked in her eyes and she repeated carefully, "Cat." Her pronunciation was thick with accent, but Samuel felt a surge of hope. He pointed to the next word. "Dog." "Dog," Olivia repeated. They went through several more words, and Samuel was struck by how quickly she picked up the sounds, how intently she focused on his mouth as he spoke. When he finally stood to leave, he handed her the book. "Study this," he said, knowing she would not understand but hoping his meaning was clear. "I will help you learn. And maybe," he added more to himself than to her, "maybe I can learn some of your words too." Over the next several days, a routine began to establish itself. Samuel would rise early and do his work around the ranch, while Olivia kept the house and prepared meals that were far better than anything Samuel had eaten in years. In the evenings after dinner, they would sit together at the table with the primer between them, and Samuel would teach her English words. At first, it was just the simple nouns from the book: table, chair, house, horse, sun, moon. But as the days passed, Samuel began to add other words, practical things she might need. Water, food, help, yes, no. Olivia proved to be a dedicated student, practicing the words throughout the day and then reciting them for Samuel each evening. But Samuel had not forgotten his promise to himself to learn her language as well. The problem was that he had no books in Spanish, no resources at all. So he began to simply ask her for words, pointing to objects and looking at her expectantly until she told him the Spanish term. "Mesa," she would say when he pointed at the table. "Silla" for chair. "Casa" for house. Samuel would repeat the words, stumbling over the unfamiliar pronunciations, and Olivia would gently correct him, sometimes reaching out to touch his arm or hand to show encouragement when he got it right. These small touches, always brief and proper, began to mean something to Samuel, became small bright moments in his day that he found himself looking forward to. On Sunday morning, a week after Olivia's arrival, Samuel hitched up the wagon and indicated that they would be going into town. Olivia looked nervous, but she put on her bonnet and allowed Samuel to help her into the wagon seat. The plan was to meet with Pastor James Sullivan at the small church in Eureka Springs and formalize their marriage. Samuel had explained this as best he could, using a combination of gestures and the few English words Olivia now understood, and she had nodded her agreement. The church was a simple white building at the edge of town, and Pastor Sullivan was waiting for them on the steps. He was an older man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, and when Samuel introduced Olivia, the pastor smiled warmly. "Welcome, my dear," Pastor Sullivan said, and then, to Samuel's astonishment, he continued in Spanish. "Bienvenida a Eureka Springs." Olivia's face lit up, and she responded in rapid Spanish. Samuel watched as the two of them conversed, seeing the relief and joy on Olivia's face at being able to communicate fully for the first time since her arrival. Pastor Sullivan turned to Samuel after a few moments. "She says she is very grateful to be here, and that you have been kind to her," the pastor said. "She wants to know if we are here to be married today." "Yes," Samuel said, "if she is willing." Pastor Sullivan translated, and Olivia looked at Samuel for a long moment before nodding. The ceremony was brief, conducted mostly in English, but with Pastor Sullivan occasionally translating key phrases for Olivia's benefit. When it came time for Samuel, to place the simple gold band on Olivia's finger, he felt his hand trembling slightly. This was real now. This woman was his wife, bound to him by law and by God, and he still barely knew her. After the ceremony, Pastor Sullivan invited them to stay for a few minutes. "I wonder if I might make a suggestion," he said, looking between Samuel and Olivia. "I have several books in Spanish, religious texts, and some basic readers. I could lend them to you, Samuel, if you are serious about learning your wife's language." "I am very serious," Samuel said immediately. "That would be a great help, Pastor." The pastor nodded and went into his small office, returning with a stack of 4 books. "These should give you a start. And Olivia, my dear," he switched to Spanish, and Samuel watched as he spoke to Olivia at length. When he finished, Olivia's eyes were bright with emotion, and she nodded vigorously. "I told her that she is welcome here anytime," Pastor Sullivan explained to Samuel, "that this is a house of God and a safe place for her. I also told her that you are a good man, Samuel, and that I believe you will treat her well. I hope I am not wrong in that assessment." "You are not wrong," Samuel said firmly. "I want to make this work, Pastor. I want her to be happy here." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it felt different than the silence of the previous days. Samuel was acutely aware of the gold band on Olivia's finger, matching the one he now wore on his own hand. They were married. She was his wife. That night, after dinner, Samuel spread the Spanish books out on the table and opened the first one. It was a basic grammar text, and though it was written entirely in Spanish, there were some English translations in the margins that previous owners had penciled in. "I am going to learn," Samuel said aloud, looking at Olivia. He pointed to himself and then to the books and then to his head, trying to convey his determination. Olivia reached across the table and opened the book to the first page. She pointed to a word and said it clearly, "Buenas noches." Samuel attempted to repeat it, mangling the pronunciation badly, and Olivia smiled. She said it again, slower this time, and Samuel tried once more. They continued like this for over an hour, with Olivia teaching him basic greetings and common phrases. It was exhausting work, trying to train his mouth and tongue to form these new sounds, but Samuel persisted. When they finally called it a night, Samuel walked Olivia to the bedroom door as had become their custom. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that would convey his gratitude and his hope for their future together, but the words escaped him in both languages. Instead, he simply said, "Good night, Olivia." She looked up at him, her dark eyes soft in the lamplight. "Good night, Samuel," she replied carefully in English, and then she added something in Spanish that he did not understand before closing the door gently behind her. Samuel returned to his bedroll by the fireplace, but sleep was long in coming. He kept thinking about the enormous task he had set for himself. Learning a new language was not something that happened quickly or easily, especially for a grown man who had never been particularly scholarly. But as he lay there in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of his house settling around him, Samuel felt a determination growing inside him. He wanted to know his wife, truly know her, and that meant learning to speak with her in her own language. The days turned into weeks, and summer deepened over the Arkansas hills. Samuel fell into a rhythm of work during the day and study in the evenings. He would labor in the fields, tend to his cattle and horses, make repairs to fences and buildings, all while mentally practicing the Spanish words and phrases he was learning. He carried one of Pastor Sullivan's books with him wherever he went, and during breaks, he would sit in the shade and pore over the pages, struggling to make sense of the grammar and vocabulary. Olivia, for her part, was also making progress with English. She practiced constantly, labeling items around the house with their English names and repeating them to herself as she worked. Samuel would often catch her talking to the chickens in halting English or murmuring to herself as she kneaded bread dough, testing out sentence structures and verb conjugations. They communicated through a mixture of both languages now, creating their own hybrid form of speech that relied heavily on gestures and context, but was slowly becoming more sophisticated. Samuel found that he could usually make Olivia understand his basic needs and intentions, and she could do the same with him. But the deeper things, the thoughts and feelings and stories that made up a person's inner life, those remained frustratingly out of reach. One evening in late July, after a particularly hot day, Samuel came in from the fields to find that Olivia had filled the large tin tub he used for bathing and had set it out on the back porch. She gestured toward it and said in careful English, "You wash. Very hot today." Samuel felt his face grow warm, not from the heat but from the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "Thank you," he said. "That is very kind." After he had bathed and changed into clean clothes, he found Olivia sitting on the front porch, looking out at the sunset. Without thinking about it, Samuel sat down beside her, leaving a proper distance between them but close enough that he could smell the faint scent of the soap she used. "Beautiful," Olivia said softly, pointing at the sky where oranges and pinks were bleeding across the horizon. "Yes," Samuel agreed. Then carefully he added in Spanish, "My bonita." Olivia turned to look at him, surprise evident on her face. "Your Spanish is getting better," she said, speaking slowly enough that Samuel could understand most of the words. "I am trying," Samuel replied, mixing English and Spanish. "I want to talk with you, really talk." Something shifted in Olivia's expression, a softening around her eyes and mouth. She said something in Spanish that was too fast and complex for Samuel to fully grasp, but he caught the words "thank you" and "kind," and thought perhaps she was expressing gratitude for his efforts. "Tell me about your family," Samuel said, speaking mostly in English but using the Spanish words he knew. "Your mother, father, where are you from?" Olivia was quiet for a long moment, and Samuel worried that he had overstepped somehow. But then she began to speak, slowly and carefully, using simple words and gestures to help him understand. She told him about her mother, who had died when Olivia was 16. Her father had been a farmer, but a drought had destroyed their crops 3 years running. He had died last winter, leaving Olivia alone with no way to support herself. When a woman from the village mentioned the matrimonial agency, Olivia had seen it as her only option for survival. Samuel listened intently, his heart aching as he pieced together her story. This brave young woman had lost everything and had traveled into the complete unknown, trusting that whatever she found here had to be better than the starvation and poverty she was leaving behind. "I am sorry," he said when she finished, wishing he had more words, better words, "for your loss. Your mother and father." "Thank you," Olivia said softly. Then, in halting English, she added, "You are a good man, Samuel. I am lucky." Samuel felt something twist in his chest. He wanted to tell her that he was the lucky one, that coming home to find her there each evening had transformed his house into something that actually felt like a home. He wanted to tell her that he thought about her throughout the day, wondered what she was doing, looked forward to their evening lessons with an eagerness that surprised him. But he did not have the words yet in either language. Instead, he simply said, "I am glad you are here." They sat together on the porch until the stars began to appear, and for the first time since Olivia's arrival, the silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. As summer gave way to autumn, Samuel's Spanish improved steadily. He could now handle basic conversations, though he still struggled with more complex topics. Olivia's English was progressing even faster, and Samuel realized that she was naturally gifted with languages in a way that he was not. She seemed to absorb new words effortlessly, and her accent, while still present, was becoming less pronounced. They had also grown more comfortable with each other physically, in small, innocent ways. Olivia would sometimes place her hand on Samuel's shoulder as she set his dinner plate in front of him. Samuel would occasionally tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear when she was focused on her reading. These touches were never inappropriate, but they carried a warmth and familiarity that made Samuel's heart beat faster. One morning in September, Samuel was working on repairing a section of the corral fence when he heard a horse approaching at speed. He looked up to see his nearest neighbor, Frank Morrison, riding toward him with an urgency that made Samuel's stomach clench with worry. "Samuel," Frank called out as he reined in his horse, "have you seen any strangers around your property in the last day or two?" "No," Samuel said, setting down his hammer. "Why? What has happened?" "There has been a break-in at the Johnsons' place, and old Mrs. Patterson says she saw two men riding this direction yesterday evening. Sheriff thinks they might be hiding out somewhere in this area. Just wanted to warn you to keep an eye out and to make sure your wife stays close to the house." Samuel felt a chill run through him despite the warm morning air. "I will be careful. Thank you for letting me know." After Frank rode off, Samuel went immediately to the house. He found Olivia in the kitchen, working on mending one of his shirts. She looked up with a smile that faded when she saw his expression. "What is wrong?" she asked in English. Samuel explained the situation as clearly as he could, using both English and Spanish to make sure she understood. "You must stay in the house today," he finished, "and keep the doors locked. If anyone comes, anyone you do not know, you do not open the door. Understand?" Olivia's eyes were wide, but she nodded. "I understand. I will be careful." Samuel retrieved his rifle from where it hung over the fireplace and checked that it was loaded. He had never been a violent man, had in fact avoided conflicts whenever possible during his years in Arkansas. But the thought of anyone threatening Olivia filled him with a protective fury that surprised him with its intensity. He spent the day working close to the house, constantly looking up from his tasks to scan the surrounding area. Everything seemed peaceful, the only sounds the wind in the trees and the distant lowing of cattle. But Samuel could not shake his unease. As evening approached and Samuel was filling the water trough for the horses, he heard Olivia call out from the house. Her voice was sharp with alarm, and Samuel dropped the bucket and ran toward the sound, his heart pounding. He found Olivia standing just inside the kitchen door, pointing toward the barn. "I saw someone," she said in Spanish, too frightened to remember her English. "A man going into the barn." Samuel raised his rifle and moved cautiously toward the barn. "Come out," he called. "I know you are in there and I am armed." For a long moment there was only silence. Then Samuel heard a scuffling sound and two men emerged from the barn with their hands raised. They were rough-looking, unshaven and dirty, with the desperate eyes of men who had been on the run. "We do not want any trouble," one of them said. "We were just looking for a place to sleep for the night." "You chose the wrong place," Samuel said, keeping his rifle trained on them. "Now get on your horses and ride out of here. And if I ever see either of you on my property again, I will not be so generous." The men glanced at each other, and for a moment Samuel thought they might try something foolish. But then they nodded and moved slowly toward the two horses that were tied up behind the barn. Within minutes, they were riding away, and Samuel watched until they disappeared from sight. He lowered his rifle and took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. When he turned around, Olivia was standing on the porch, and before he could say anything, she ran to him and threw her arms around him. Samuel stood frozen for a moment, shocked by the sudden embrace. Then he carefully wrapped one arm around her, holding her close while keeping the rifle safely pointed away with his other hand. He could feel her trembling, could feel her heart racing against his chest. "It is all right," he murmured in Spanish. "They are gone. You are safe." Olivia pulled back slightly to look up at him, her eyes searching his face. She said something in rapid Spanish that Samuel could not fully follow, but he caught the words for scared and worried and thank you. "I will always protect you," Samuel said, speaking slowly in Spanish to make sure he got the words right. "You are my wife. You are safe here." Something changed in Olivia's expression then, a softening and warming that made Samuel's breath catch. She reached up and touched his face, her palm cool against his skin, and said quietly in English, "You are good man, Samuel Kane." That night, after they had secured all the doors and windows and Samuel had reported the incident to the sheriff who had ridden out to take his statement, they sat together at the table with their books as usual. But Samuel found it hard to concentrate on the Spanish conjugations in front of him. He kept looking up at Olivia, remembering the way she had felt in his arms, the trust in her eyes when she had looked at him. "Olivia," he said finally, setting down his book. She looked up, her attention fully on him. Samuel took a deep breath and continued in careful Spanish. "I want to say something, but my Spanish is not good enough. So I will say it in English, and later, when I have learned enough, I will say it again in Spanish. Is that all right?" Olivia nodded slowly, her expression curious and gentle. Samuel gathered his courage. "I know this marriage started as an arrangement, as a practical solution for both of us. But these months with you have been the happiest of my life. You have made this house a home. You have brought light and warmth to days that used to feel empty. I care about you, Olivia, more than I expected to, more than I have words for in either language." He paused, his heart racing. "I do not expect you to feel the same way. I know you came here because you had no other choice, and I know I am just the man who happened to send for a bride when you needed a way out. But I wanted you to know how I feel. You deserve to know." Olivia was very still, her eyes fixed on his face. Samuel could not read her expression, and fear began to creep in. Had he said too much? Had he made her uncomfortable? But then Olivia spoke carefully in English. "When I came here, I was very scared. Everything was strange. The food, the land, the language. I thought maybe I made terrible mistake, but you have been kind every day, patient every day. You give me your bedroom and sleep by the fire. You try to learn my language so we can speak. You protect me from danger." She paused, seeming to search for words. "I also care for you, Samuel. More each day. I am happy to be here, happy to be your wife." Samuel felt as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. "Truly," he managed to say. Olivia smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Truly," she confirmed. They stayed up late that night, talking in their mixture of English and Spanish, sharing more about their lives and their hopes for the future. Samuel told her about growing up in Tennessee, about coming west after his parents died, about the hard years of building the ranch from nothing. Olivia told him about her childhood in Mexico, about helping her mother in the garden, about the festivals in her village and the friends she had left behind. When they finally stood to go to their separate sleeping areas, there was a moment of hesitation. Samuel wanted nothing more than to kiss his wife, to hold her properly, but he was aware of how slowly trust was built and how quickly it could be destroyed. So he simply took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Good night, Olivia," he said. "Good night, Samuel," she replied. But then she added in Spanish, "I am glad I married you." Samuel smiled. "I am glad you married me too." The next few weeks brought a subtle but profound shift in their relationship. They sought out reasons to be near each other, to touch hands or shoulders as they passed. Their evening study sessions sometimes devolved into simply sitting close together and talking, using whatever words they could muster in whatever language to share their thoughts and feelings. Samuel found himself watching Olivia as she worked, admiring the graceful way she moved, the concentration on her face as she focused on a task, the rare, full smile that transformed her entire countenance. One afternoon in mid-October, Samuel came in from working on the north pasture to find Olivia standing in the middle of the main room, looking around with a critical eye. When she noticed him, she launched into an explanation in rapid Spanish, pointing to various parts of the room and gesturing animatedly. Samuel held up his hand with a laugh. "Slower, please. My Spanish is still not that good." Olivia took a breath and started again, more carefully. She wanted to make some changes to the house, to make curtains for the windows and perhaps get a rug for the floor. She had been saving the small amount of money Samuel gave her each week for household expenses, and she thought she had enough now to buy fabric from the general store in town. "That is a wonderful idea," Samuel said. "We can go to town on Saturday. You can pick out whatever you like." That Saturday, they drove into Eureka Springs together, and Samuel felt a surge of pride as they walked down the main street with Olivia's hand resting lightly on his arm. Several people called out greetings, and Samuel was pleased to see that Olivia could now respond in English, though she still seemed shy around strangers. At the general store, Samuel watched as Olivia carefully examined the bolts of fabric, running her hands over the materials and holding different colors up to the light. She finally selected a cheerful blue cotton for curtains and a length of green fabric that she indicated was for a tablecloth. Samuel also insisted on buying her a new dress, a ready-made one in a soft rose color that the shopkeeper's wife said would suit her beautifully. As they were loading their purchases into the wagon, they ran into Pastor Sullivan. The older man greeted them warmly and then said to Samuel, "I have been meaning to ask how your Spanish studies are progressing." "Slowly but surely," Samuel admitted. "I can understand quite a bit now, though speaking it is still a challenge." Pastor Sullivan smiled. "Language learning takes time and patience, but I would say that you have made remarkable progress for someone studying on their own." He glanced between Samuel and Olivia, and his smile widened. "I would also say that you both seem quite happy. Am I wrong?" Samuel felt his face grow warm, but he returned the smile. "No, Pastor, you are not wrong." On the ride home, Olivia was quiet and Samuel glanced over at her several times, wondering what she was thinking. Finally, she said in English, "People in town are kind to me. They smile and say hello. I was worried they would not like me because I am from Mexico, because I am different." Samuel reached over and took her hand, balancing the reins with his other. "Anyone who takes the time to know you will see what I see," he said. "A kind, hardworking, intelligent woman. If they cannot see that, then they are fools." Olivia squeezed his hand and leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it filled Samuel with warmth. That evening, after dinner, Olivia brought out the new fabric and began working on the curtains. Samuel sat nearby, supposedly studying his Spanish but mostly watching her work. The lamplight caught in her dark hair, and her brow was furrowed in concentration as she measured and cut and stitched. Samuel found himself thinking about how different his life had become since her arrival, how much richer and fuller each day felt. "Olivia," he said, and she looked up from her sewing. "Come sit with me for a moment." She set aside her work and moved to sit beside him at the table. Samuel took a deep breath and then began to speak in Spanish, slowly and carefully, determined to say this properly. I have been studying very hard because there is something I want to tell you in your language. I do not know if my Spanish is good enough yet, but I want to try." He paused, gathering his courage. "Desde que llegaste a mi vida to do es measure. Intelligent, hermosa, y amiable. Cada día me siento más afortunado de que seas mi esposa." He paused, looking into her eyes. "Te amo, Olivia, I love you." Olivia's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment Samuel panicked, thinking he had said something wrong or offensive. But then she smiled, and he realized they were happy tears. "Te amo también, Samuel," she whispered. "I love you too." Samuel reached out and cupped her face gently in his hands, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. But Olivia leaned into his touch, and then, finally, Samuel kissed his wife for the first time. It was soft and sweet and full of all the weeks of growing affection and longing that had built between them. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Samuel admitted. Olivia laughed, the sound bright and joyful. "I have wanted you to," she replied. That night, Samuel did not set up his bedroll by the fireplace. Instead, he followed Olivia into the bedroom, and for the first time since her arrival, they slept in the same room, in the same bed, as husband and wife in truth as well as in name. Samuel held her close, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, how right it felt to have her there. "Tell me something in Spanish," Olivia murmured sleepily. Samuel thought for a moment, then said, El mejor regalo que he recibido." "You are the best gift I have ever received." Olivia turned in his arms to look at him. "Your Spanish is getting very good," she said with a smile. Then she added in Spanish, "And you are mine." The autumn passed in a blur of happiness. Samuel's ranch work continued as always. But now he had Olivia working beside him when she could, feeding chickens and collecting eggs, helping to harvest the kitchen garden she had planted, even learning to ride one of the gentler horses so she could accompany him sometimes when he checked on the cattle. Her English was now fluent enough for complex conversations, and Samuel's Spanish, while still imperfect, allowed them to switch freely between languages depending on what they were discussing. They talked about everything now: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Olivia told him about the guilt she sometimes felt for leaving Mexico, for abandoning her homeland even though she had no real choice. Samuel told her about the loneliness of the past few years, how he had sometimes wondered if he would spend his entire life alone. They learned each other's preferences and quirks, discovered shared interests in things like music and stories, and developed the kind of comfortable intimacy that made Samuel feel like he had known Olivia all his life rather than just a few months. In November, the first snow fell, earlier than usual for Arkansas. Samuel came in from securing the barn to find Olivia standing on the front porch, staring at the white flakes falling from the sky with wonder on her face. "Snow," she said, holding out her hand to catch the flakes. "I have never seen it before. In my village it was always warm." Samuel came to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It is beautiful but cold," he said. "We will need to make sure we have plenty of firewood for the winter." Olivia leaned into him. "I am not worried. I have you to keep me warm." The winter months were cozy and intimate. With less ranch work to do during the short, cold days, Samuel and Olivia spent long hours inside by the fire. They continued their language lessons, though now it was more for the pleasure of learning than out of necessity. Samuel would teach Olivia English words she did not know, often literary or technical terms, and she would teach him the more nuanced and poetic aspects of Spanish. They read together from the books Pastor Sullivan had loaned them, taking turns reading aloud and correcting each other's pronunciation. On Christmas morning, Samuel woke early and carefully extracted himself from Olivia's sleeping form. He had been working on something in secret for weeks, staying up late some nights after Olivia had gone to sleep, and he wanted to have it ready for her when she woke. He had carved her a small jewelry box from a piece of cherry wood, decorating the lid with an intricate design of roses and vines. Inside, he had placed a silver locket he had purchased on a trip to town, and inside the locket, he had carefully placed a small photograph of the two of them together that had been taken by a traveling photographer who had passed through Eureka Springs in October. When Olivia woke and came into the main room, she found Samuel sitting at the table with the box in front of him. "Feliz Navidad," he said with a smile. "Merry Christmas." Olivia's eyes widened when she saw the box. She opened it slowly, reverently, and gasped when she saw the locket. "Samuel, this is beautiful. You made this." "The box, yes," Samuel said. "The locket I bought. I hope you like it." Olivia fastened the locket around her neck and then threw her arms around Samuel. "I love it, thank you, but I did not get you anything. I did not know we were doing gifts." "You are here," Samuel said simply. "That is gift enough." But Olivia shook her head. "No, I want to give you something." She thought for a moment, then took his hand and placed it over her stomach. "I was going to wait to tell you to be more certain, but I think this is the right time. I believe I am going to have a baby, Samuel, our baby." Samuel stared at her, the words taking a moment to fully register. "A baby," he repeated. "Truly," Olivia nodded, her eyes shining with joy and a little bit of nervousness. "I think so, yes. It is still early, but all the signs are there." Samuel stood abruptly, then lifted Olivia into his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, he kissed her soundly and then knelt down and kissed her stomach. "Hello, little one," he said softly. Then he looked up at Olivia. "This is the best Christmas I have ever had." The winter passed with Samuel becoming increasingly protective of Olivia, insisting that she rest more and not work too hard. Olivia tolerated his fussing with good humor, though she insisted that she was perfectly capable of continuing most of her normal activities. By February, there was no doubt about her condition, and the women of Eureka Springs began stopping by to offer advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and supplies. Samuel threw himself into preparing for the baby's arrival. He built a cradle from the same cherry wood he had used for the jewelry box, carving gentle curves and making sure there were no rough edges. He repaired every inch of the house, checking for drafts and making sure everything was secure and safe. And he continued to study Spanish with renewed dedication, wanting to be able to speak to his child in both languages. One evening in March, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Olivia said quietly, "I want to tell you something." Samuel looked at her, hearing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" "When I first came here, I was so scared and so alone. I thought I would never feel at home anywhere again after leaving Mexico, but you have given me something I did not expect. You have given me a family again, a place where I belong. This baby, our child, is going to be born into a home filled with love. That means everything to me." Samuel took her hand and raised it to his lips. "You and this baby are my whole world," he said. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you both know how much you are loved." In May, when the hills were green with new growth and wildflowers bloomed in bright patches across the meadows, Olivia went into labor. Samuel rode as fast as he dared to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Callahan, and then spent the next several hours pacing anxiously while the women worked. Every time he heard Olivia cry out, he wanted to burst through the bedroom door, but Mrs. Callahan had been firm about him staying out of the way. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard the unmistakable sound of a baby crying. Samuel's knees went weak with relief, and moments later Mrs. Callahan emerged with a smile on her face. "You have a son," she announced. "A healthy, strong boy, and your wife did wonderfully." Samuel rushed into the bedroom to find Olivia propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Samuel, come meet your son," she said softly. Samuel approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at the baby in Olivia's arms. He had a cap of dark hair, and his eyes, though still unfocused, seemed to be scanning the world around him with interest. One tiny fist had escaped the blankets and was waving in the air. "He is perfect," Samuel whispered, reaching out to gently touch his son's hand. The baby immediately gripped his finger with surprising strength. What should we name him? They had discussed names over the past few months but had not made a final decision. Olivia thought for a moment and then said, "Santiago. It is a good, strong name in Spanish, and in English, James, so he can go by either name depending on who he is with." "Santiago James Kane," Samuel said, testing out the sound of it. "I like it very much." Over the next few weeks, Samuel discovered that nothing in his life had prepared him for fatherhood. The baby needed constant attention, and Samuel found himself helping with everything from diaper changes to late-night feedings when Santiago refused to settle. It was exhausting and sometimes overwhelming, but every time his son looked at him or gripped his finger or made those funny little baby noises, Samuel felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it almost frightened him. Olivia was a natural mother, patient and calm even when the baby cried for hours or refused to nurse or seemed to be fussy for no discernible reason. She sang to Santiago in Spanish, old lullabies from her childhood, and the sound of her voice would often soothe the baby when nothing else could. By the time Santiago was 3 months old, a routine had established itself. Samuel continued to run the ranch, though now he made sure to spend more time close to the house so he could help Olivia whenever she needed it. The baby was growing rapidly, becoming more alert and interactive, and Samuel loved nothing more than sitting with his son in the evenings, talking to him in both English and Spanish and watching as those bright dark eyes tracked his face. One evening, as Samuel was holding Santiago and Olivia was preparing dinner, there was a knock at the door. Samuel opened it to find Pastor Sullivan standing there with a smile on his face. "Pastor, this is a surprise," Samuel said. "Please come in." The pastor entered and greeted Olivia warmly before turning his attention to the baby. "I had heard that you had been blessed with a son. Congratulations to you both." "Thank you, Pastor," Olivia said. "Would you like to hold him?" Pastor Sullivan carefully took the baby and looked down at him with gentle fondness. "He is beautiful. Have you had him baptized yet?" Samuel and Olivia exchanged glances. "Not yet," Samuel admitted. "We have been meaning to, but the last few months have been so busy." "I would be honored to perform the ceremony," Pastor Sullivan said. "Whenever you are ready." They settled on the following Sunday, and Samuel spent the week making sure everything was in order. He wanted this day to be special, a formal welcome for his son into the community and into the faith that both he and Olivia shared. The baptism was a simple but moving ceremony, attended by many of their neighbors and friends from town. As Pastor Sullivan blessed the baby and made the sign of the cross on Santiago's forehead, Samuel stood with his arm around Olivia and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Just over a year ago, he had been alone on his ranch, lonely and wondering if his life would ever be anything more than work and solitude. Now he had a wife he loved deeply and a son who had transformed his entire world. After the ceremony, there was a small gathering at the church where the women had prepared food, and everyone took turns admiring the baby and congratulating the parents. Samuel noticed how comfortable Olivia seemed now, chatting easily with the other women in English and occasionally translating when someone wanted to know what the Spanish lullabies she sang meant, or how to prepare some of the Mexican dishes she had taught the church ladies to make. As they rode home that evening with Santiago sleeping peacefully in Olivia's arms, Samuel said, "Do you ever miss Mexico? Your village and the people you knew there?" Olivia was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I miss the landscape and some of the traditions, and I miss the friends I left behind. But this is my home now, Samuel, here with you and with our son. I would not trade this life for anything." Samuel reached over and squeezed her hand. "I am very glad to hear that." The summer of 1883 was hot and dry, and Samuel worried about his cattle and crops. But despite the weather challenges, it was a happy time. Santiago was growing rapidly, becoming more interactive and curious about the world around him. He was fascinated by the horses and would squeal with delight whenever Samuel took him out to the corral. Olivia had planted a vegetable garden and had remarkable success, despite the dry conditions, thanks to her careful watering and the techniques she had learned from her mother back in Mexico. One afternoon, Samuel came in from working to find Olivia sitting at the table with paper and a pencil, writing a letter. She looked up when he entered and smiled. "I am writing to the women in my old village," she explained. "I want them to know that I am well and happy. That coming to America was a good decision." She paused. "I also want to encourage them. There were several other young women in my situation when I left, women who had lost their families and had no way to support themselves. I want them to know that there are opportunities here if they are brave enough to take them." Samuel felt a surge of pride at his wife's compassion and strength. "That is a wonderful thing to do," he said. "Would you like me to post it in town for you tomorrow?" "Yes, please," Olivia said. Then she added, "I also thought perhaps we could help if any of them want to come west. We could contribute to their travel expenses and I could help them adjust to their new lives here, if that is all right with you." Samuel did not even need to think about it. "Of course it is all right. We have been blessed, Olivia. It is only right that we help others when we can." Over the following months, Olivia corresponded regularly with women from her village. Several wrote back expressing interest in coming to America, and Olivia worked with Pastor Sullivan to connect them with the matrimonial agency in San Francisco. She also used her own experience to prepare them for what to expect, teaching them basic English phrases and explaining American customs. By the time Santiago celebrated his first birthday in May of 1884, 3 young women from Olivia's village had made the journey west and had married men in Arkansas and Missouri. All 3 had written to Olivia expressing their gratitude, and Samuel could see how much it meant to his wife to be able to help others in this way. "You are making a real difference," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Santiago toddle around the yard under their watchful eyes. "I just remember how scared and alone I felt when I first arrived," Olivia said. "If I can make the journey easier for someone else, then I want to do that." As Santiago grew from a baby into a toddler, Samuel marveled at how much he resembled both of his parents. He had Olivia's dark hair and eyes, but Samuel's height and build. And he was already showing signs of being bilingual, responding to commands in both English and Spanish, and beginning to speak simple words in both languages. In the fall of 1884, Olivia told Samuel that she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy seemed easier, perhaps because they knew what to expect and were not as anxious. Samuel still fussed over her, but Olivia had become skilled at managing his worrying while also allowing herself to rest when she needed to. Their second child, a daughter they named Elena Grace, was born in April of 1885. Where Santiago had been a loud and demanding baby, Elena was calm and observant, content to lie in her cradle and watch the world around her with wide, curious eyes. Samuel had not thought it possible to love another child as much as he loved Santiago, but Elena proved him wrong. There was something about holding his tiny daughter, about the way she seemed to fit perfectly in his arms, that touched something deep in his heart. He found himself getting up in the middle of the night not because she was crying, but simply because he wanted to check on her, to make sure she was breathing, to marvel at her existence. With 2 young children, life on the ranch became busier and more chaotic. But Samuel would not have changed a thing. He loved the noise and activity, loved coming in from the fields to find Santiago helping his mother with small tasks while Elena watched from her cradle, loved the family meals where they all sat together and talked about their day in both English and Spanish. One evening, when Santiago was 3 and Elena was just 6 months old, Samuel and Olivia sat together on the porch after the children had been put to bed. The sun was setting over the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "You remember the first time we sat here together?" Samuel asked. "That evening when I tried to ask about your family and could barely string together a sentence in Spanish," Olivia laughed. "I remember. I also remember thinking that you were very sweet for trying so hard." "I wanted to know you," Samuel said. "Really know you. Not just live beside you, but understand you." He turned to look at her. "I think that was when I started to fall in love with you, even though I did not realize it at the time." Olivia reached over and took his hand. "I fell in love with you the day you gave me the primer and told me you would learn Spanish too. I could see that you were not just trying to make me fit into your world. You were willing to enter into mine as well. That meant everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the cicadas and the distant sound of cattle lowing. Finally, Samuel said, "I have been thinking about expanding the ranch, maybe buying some more land to the north. The children are going to need something to inherit someday, and I want to make sure we build something substantial for them." "That sounds like a good idea," Olivia said. "But Samuel, our children already have something more valuable than land or money." "What is that?" "They have parents who love each other and who love them," Olivia said. "They have a home where they hear 2 languages and learn about 2 cultures. They are growing up knowing that they belong to something bigger than themselves. That is the real inheritance we are giving them." Samuel pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "You are right, as always, but I still think I will buy that land, just to be practical." Olivia laughed and snuggled closer to him. "Always practical, my husband." The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Samuel's ranch grew and prospered, and by 1890, he employed 2 hands to help with the cattle and had expanded his herd significantly. Santiago was now 7 years old and already showing an aptitude for ranch work, following his father everywhere and asking endless questions about horses and cattle and land management. Elena, at 5, was quieter but no less intelligent, spending hours with her mother learning to cook and sew and tend the garden. In 1888, Olivia had given birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Miguel Thomas. And in early 1890, she had delivered healthy twin daughters, Rosa Ann and Lucia Mee. The house that had once seemed almost too large for just Samuel was now constantly full of noise and laughter, and the organized chaos that came with 5 children. Samuel had built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. He had also taught Olivia to handle the ranch accounts, and she had proven to have a natural head for business, often seeing opportunities that Samuel had missed. They had become respected members of the Eureka Springs community, known for their strong work ethic and their generosity toward others. Olivia continued her work helping Mexican women who wanted to come to America, and she had established a small informal network that connected women with opportunities and resources. Samuel was proud of all she had accomplished and often told her so. One evening in the summer of 1890, after all the children had finally been settled in bed, Samuel and Olivia collapsed onto the porch swing that he had built the previous spring. "I am exhausted," Olivia said with a laugh. 5 children under the age of 8. What were we thinking? "We were thinking that we love each other and that each one of these children is a blessing," Samuel said, putting his arm around her and pulling her close. "Though I will admit, some days are more challenging than others." "Do you ever miss the quiet?" Olivia asked. "The days when it was just the two of us." Samuel thought about it. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity," he admitted, "but I would not trade what we have now for anything. Our life is full and rich and sometimes overwhelming, but it is also everything I ever wanted and more than I knew I needed." Olivia looked up at him with soft eyes. "I love you, Samuel Kane. Thank you for learning my language all those years ago. Thank you for wanting to know me, really know me." "I love you too, Olivia, and I would learn 1,000 languages if that is what it took to be with you." They sat together on the swing as the stars began to appear, listening to the familiar sounds of their ranch settling down for the night. Inside the house, their 5 children slept peacefully, safe and loved and completely unaware of the incredible journey their parents had taken to build this life together. Samuel thought back to that hot summer day in 1882, when he had first seen Olivia stepping down from the stagecoach, scared and alone and unable to speak a word of English. He remembered the frustration and awkwardness of those early days, the enormous effort it had taken to bridge the chasm between them. But every moment of struggle had been worth it, because it had led to this, a life filled with love and family and purpose. "Tell me something in Spanish," Samuel said, as he sometimes still did even though he was now fluent in the language. Olivia smiled. "Eres el amor de mi vida, y cada día doy gracias de haberte encontrado." You are the love of my life, and every day I am grateful to have found you. Samuel kissed her gently. "And you are mine." As the years continued to pass, the Kane family remained a fixture in Eureka Springs. Santiago grew into a responsible young man who took over more and more of the ranch operations as Samuel grew older. Elena became a teacher, using her bilingual skills to help other immigrant families adjust to life in Arkansas. Miguel decided to study veterinary medicine, while the twins, Rosa and Lucia, were still young but showed every sign of inheriting their mother's compassion and their father's determination. Samuel and Olivia grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They never forgot the obstacles they had overcome in those early days, and they made sure to tell their children and eventually their grandchildren the story of how they had fallen in love, despite the language barrier. How Samuel had spent months learning Spanish just so he could tell Olivia he loved her in her native tongue. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1907, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were now 11 grandchildren running around the property, and the old ranch house rang with laughter and music, and the sound of multiple conversations in both English and Spanish. That evening, after most of the guests had left and the grandchildren had been bundled off to bed by their parents, Samuel and Olivia sat together on their porch, in the same spot where they had spent countless evenings over the past 25 years. "We did it," Samuel said softly. "We built a good life together." "We did," Olivia agreed. Better than I ever imagined possible. On that day I arrived in this strange place, so scared and alone. You were never alone, Samuel said. Not from the moment I saw you. I just had to figure out how to tell you that. Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder. And you did, in the most beautiful way possible. They sat in peaceful silence, watching the sun set over the land they had worked together for so many years. 5 children, 11 grandchildren, a thriving ranch, and countless memories of a life well lived. It had all started with a young woman who spoke no English and a cowboy who learned her language just so he could say, "I love you." And in the end, Samuel thought as he held his wife close, those 3 words, spoken in any language, had made all the difference. They had built a bridge across cultures and continents, had created a family that honored both of their heritages, and had proven that love, when nurtured with patience and effort and genuine care, could overcome any obstacle. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Samuel whispered in Spanish, "Te amo, mi vida." I love you, my life. And Olivia, her voice still carrying the accent that Samuel had come to love over their many years together, whispered back in English, I love you too, my husband. Always and forever. It was, Samuel reflected, the perfect ending to a story that had begun with uncertainty and fear but had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. He had gained not just a wife but a partner, not just a family but a legacy that would continue long after he was gone. And all because he had been willing to put in the effort to truly know the woman who had stepped off that stagecoach so many years ago, to bridge the gap between them one carefully learned word at a time. The ranch continued to prosper under the management of their children, and the Kane name became synonymous with integrity and hard work throughout Carroll County. The little network Olivia had created to help Mexican women immigrating to Arkansas had grown into a formal organization that provided language education, job placement, and community support. Several of the women Olivia had helped over the years went on to start their own businesses or become leaders in their communities, and they always credited Olivia Kane as the woman who had shown them it was possible to build a new life in a new land without losing connection to their heritage. Samuel had retired from active ranch work in his early 60s, though he still loved to go out and check on the cattle or help with minor repairs when the weather was good. He spent his time reading, carving wooden toys for his grandchildren, and working on his Spanish, which he insisted he still needed to improve even though Olivia always told him his accent was nearly perfect now. In 1912, on a warm spring evening, Samuel and Olivia celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. The entire extended family gathered once again, and this time there were 18 grandchildren and even 2 great-grandchildren. The old ranch house had been expanded several more times over the years, and now sprawled across the hillside, with multiple generations of Kanes occupying various wings and additions. During the celebration, Santiago, now a distinguished man of 32 with a family of his own, stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us that love knows no boundaries, that family is built on effort and understanding, and that the best things in life are worth working for. Thank you for building this family and for showing us what real commitment looks like." Everyone raised their glasses, and Samuel felt tears prick his eyes. He looked at Olivia, who was also crying, and squeezed her hand. "We were very lucky," he whispered to her. "No," Olivia corrected gently. "We were very determined and very much in love. That is not luck, my Amor. That is choice." As the party continued around them, Samuel reflected on the truth of her words. They had chosen each other day after day, year after year. They had chosen to overcome the barriers between them, to build something together despite the challenges, to honor each other's cultures and languages and histories. And those choices had created something lasting and beautiful. The years continued to be kind to Samuel and Olivia. They remained active and healthy well into their 70s, still taking evening walks around the property, still sitting together on the porch swing to watch the sunset, still switching effortlessly between English and Spanish depending on their mood and subject matter. In the fall of 1922, on the 40th anniversary of Olivia's arrival in Eureka Springs, the family threw an enormous celebration. All 5 children were there with their families, along with 23 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren. The ranch was overflowing with people, and the celebration lasted an entire weekend. On the final evening, as the guests were beginning to depart, Olivia asked Samuel to take a walk with her. They strolled slowly down to the corral, where a few horses dozed in the evening light, and stood looking out over the land that had been their home for 4 decades. "You remember the first time we stood here together?" Olivia asked. "You were trying to explain something about the horses, and I had no idea what you were saying." Samuel laughed. "I remember. I also remember thinking that I had made a terrible mistake, that we would never be able to communicate. But we did," Olivia said. "We found a way." "We did," Samuel agreed. "You taught me Spanish, I taught you English, and together we created something entirely new, our own language of love and understanding." Olivia turned to face him, and Samuel was struck by how beautiful she still was. Her hair was now completely gray, and there were deep lines around her eyes and mouth. But to him, she was still the young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach, brave and scared and determined to make a new life. "I would do it all again," Olivia said softly. "Every difficult moment, every struggle, every challenge, I would do it all again for this life with you." Samuel pulled her close and held her, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "As would I, my Amor, as would I." They stood there together as the sun set, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and had built a life that exceeded anything either of them could have imagined on that hot summer day in 1882. A life filled with love and family and purpose. A life that proved that the greatest rewards often come from the hardest work, and that real love is not about finding someone who speaks your language, but about being willing to learn theirs. As they walked back toward the house, hand in hand, Samuel said in Spanish, "You know what my favorite thing is about knowing your language?" "What?" Olivia asked. "It means I can tell you I love you in 2 languages instead of 1. Double the words, double the meaning." Olivia laughed, the sound still as bright and joyful as it had been 40 years ago. "Then I will say it in both as well. I love you, Samuel Kane, Te amo. And I love you, Olivia Kane, Te amo." They climbed the porch steps together, ready to rejoin their enormous, loud, loving family. Behind them, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Arkansas sky in shades of gold and red. And in that moment, everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. 2 lives, once separate and isolated, now woven together so completely that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. 2 languages, once barriers, now bridges. 2 hearts, once lonely, now full to overflowing with love. It was a fitting conclusion to a love story that had begun with uncertainty and silence, but had grown into something loud and joyful and lasting. The mail-order bride who spoke no English and the cowboy who learned her language to say, "I love you," had built not just a marriage but a legacy, not just a family but a testament to the power of effort and commitment and genuine love. And that legacy would continue for generations to come. A reminder that the best things in life are always worth working for.